The atmosphere within the Grand Synod of the Ethel Guardian Ascendancy was not merely air to be breathed. It was a physical weight, heavy with the scent of ozone, polished obsidian, and the oppressive gravity of 10,000 years of unchallenged rule. Here, in the heart of a station that orbited a dying neutron star, the masters of the known galaxy gathered not to debate war, but to observe an execution. The lighting was dim, cast in the violet hues preferred by the Ethelgard highborn, gleaming off their chitinous armor and the bioluminescent veins that pulsed along their elongated necks. Below the high dais, the holographic projection pit, a sphere of coherent light massive enough to dwarf the delegates standing at its rim, displayed the Sol system. It was an insignificant corner of the galaxy, a backwater cul-de-sac of little strategic value, save for the biological curiosity that inhabited its third planet. The mood was not one of excitement, nor even of pity. It was a cold, clinical detachment, the sort one might feel when watching a microbial culture finally succumb to a superior antibiotic. The Krell Empire, a species of brutal, industrial conquest, had finally tired of the humans' stubborn refusal to capitulate, and had committed their grand armada to the erasure of the species. To the Ethelgard, who fancied themselves the archivists and judges of sentient life, this was merely the closing of a file, a footnote in the grand library of extinction. High Archon Vallis, his carapace adorned with the platinum filigree of the Supreme Adjudicator, looked down at the projection with eyes that were black, multifaceted pools of indifference. He tapped a claw against the railing, the sound echoing sharply in the silence of the chamber. Beside him stood strategist Kalen, a younger, more turbulent mind, whose bioluminescence flickered with a nervous yellow rhythm that betrayed his inner turmoil. Kalen had spent the last 3 cycles studying the humans, analyzing their primitive radio broadcasts, their chaotic history, and their baffling psychology. Where Vallis saw only a primitive species facing natural selection, Kalen saw something else, an anomaly in the data, a resilience that defied the mathematical models of the ascendancy. The humans should have surrendered when the Krell glassed their first colony. They should have broken when the blockade starved their outer stations. Instead, they had dug in. They had retrofitted mining lasers into weapons. They had turned their atmosphere into a fortress of flak and desperate prayer. But now, as the Krell dreadnoughts moved into orbital bombardment formation, geometry and physics were finally asserting their dominance over human spirit. "It is a mercy," Vallis intoned, his voice a subvocal rumble that vibrated in the chest cavities of everyone in the hall. "The Krell are blunt instruments devoid of art, but they are efficient. The humans have prolonged their suffering beyond the bounds of reason. To struggle against the inevitable is the mark of a primitive mind. A civilized species accepts its twilight with dignity." Kalen shifted his weight, his mandibles clicking softly. He watched the holographic representation of Earth, surrounded by the red icons of the Krell fleet. The blue marble was shrouded in the debris of shattered orbital habitats, a ring of iron tombs encircling the world. "Is it primitive, Archon?" Kalen asked, his voice quiet, risking a breach of protocol by questioning the Elder during a final observation. "Or is it something we have forgot? I have parsed their transmission data. They are not screaming for mercy. They are coordinating. Even now, with 90% of their fleet converted to scrap, they are attempting to flank the Krell flagship. It is a suicide run, mathematically impossible, yet they initiate the burn. Why?" Vallis did not turn his head. To look at a subordinate was to elevate them. He kept his gaze fixed on the dying world. "Because they are biological errors, Kalen. They lack the logic centers to process defeat. They operate on chemical surges, hope, rage, love, inefficient fuels for a starfaring civilization. Watch. The Krell flagship is charging its particle lance. The final variable is about to be resolved." The sensor feeds magnified the image. The Krell flagship, a monstrosity of jagged metal and exposed reactors, began to glow with a malevolent green energy. It was a planet killer, a weapon designed to ignite the atmosphere and scour the surface down to the bedrock. The human ships, tiny specks of silver against the black, accelerated. They were not fleeing. They were charging the muzzle of the gun. The Grand Synod watched in silence, 1,000 alien minds united in the anticipation of the end. The Krell transmission, intercepted and translated by the Ascendancy's databanks, blared through the chamber, a guttural roar of triumph and mockery. "Burn, little monkeys, burn and be forgotten." The energy spike on the sensors went vertical. The firing sequence was locked. The Krell weapon unleashed a beam of concentrated coherent particles, a spear of light destined to boil the Pacific Ocean. Kalen closed his eyes, a gesture of respect he had learned from the very species he was watching die. The beam traveled at the speed of light. Impact was instantaneous, or it should have been. But the sensors of the Grand Synod did not register an impact. They registered a shear. A collective gasp, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a gale, swept through the chamber. The holographic pit flickered, the data streams turning a violent, warning crimson. Valis leaned forward, his indifference shattered. "Report," he barked, his voice losing its measured cadence. "Sensor malfunction. Did the planet's magnetosphere deflect the beam?" The telemetry officer, a drone of the cast of eyes, was typing frantically, its limbs a blur. "Negative, Archon, negative. The beam was intercepted." The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. A planet-killing beam could not be intercepted. It could not be blocked. It was a force of nature harnessed by machinery. Yet as the visual sensors recalibrated and the blinding glare of the energy discharge faded, the truth revealed itself, suspended in the void between the Krell flagship and the Earth. Space had not merely been occupied, it had been rewritten. Hovering in the path of the beam was a shape. It was not a ship in any sense that the Ethelgard or the Krell understood. It was a geometric impossibility, a monolith of matte black material that absorbed the light of the stars, rendering it a void within the void. It was massive, its scale defying the logic of structural engineering, eclipsing the Krell flagship as a mountain eclipses a pebble. The particle beam, enough energy to shatter a continent, had struck the face of this object and simply vanished. There was no explosion, no shield flare, no dissipation of heat. The energy had been absorbed, eaten, nullified. The object hung there, silent, motionless, a tombstone dropped from a higher dimension. The Krell fleet halted its advance. The human defenders, their suicide runs interrupted, drifted in confusion. In the Grand Synod, the silence was absolute. "What is that?" Kalen whispered, his bioluminescence draining to a pale, fearful white. "Is it a progenitor artifact, a celestial phenomenon?" Valis stared, his mandibles trembling. "Scan it, deep spectrum. I want to know the atomic composition." The telemetry officer worked, but the screens remained stubbornly blank. "Active scans are being returned as null data, Archon. The object has an albedo of 0. It is not reflecting radar, lidar, or tachyons. It is like looking at a hole in the universe. Wait, detecting a localized gravitational distortion. High energy readings. It is powering up." On the display, the matte black surface of the monolith began to change. Thin, intricate lines of gold light began to trace geometric patterns across its surface, glowing with a brightness that hurt the eyes even through the simulation. The patterns were not random. They were fractal, precise, and achingly beautiful. The sheer scale of the object became apparent as the golden lines illuminated its contours. It was a fortress, a cathedral of war, easily 10 times the mass of the entire Krell armada combined. And then it spoke. It did not use radio waves. It did not use laser communication. It broadcast on all frequencies across the entire electromagnetic spectrum and simultaneously pushed a telepathic pressure wave that was felt by every sentient being in the system, and indeed by the observers in the Grand Synod light years away. The voice was not digital. It was human. But it was a human voice stripped of all frailty, refined by eons of discipline, a voice that sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. "This is the Aegis of the Void. Cease fire." The command was simple, yet it carried an authority that made the bones of the Ethelgard vibrate. The Krell, however, were a species bred for aggression, not introspection. Their high warlord, recovering from the shock, roared over the open comms. "Unknown vessel, you interfere with the lawful conquest of the Krell Empire. Identify yourself and power down, or you will be dismantled." The Krell fleet, thousands of warships bristling with kinetic cannons and plasma torpedoes, turned their targeting arrays away from Earth and toward the monolith. It was a display of firepower that had subjugated 100 worlds. Against the Aegis, it looked like a swarm of insects buzzing around a storm cloud. The response from the Aegis was immediate and terrifyingly calm. "We do not recognize your authority. You have violated the sanctity of the cradle. Withdraw or be unmade." "Fire!" screamed the Krell warlord. The void erupted. Thousands of missiles, terawatts of laser energy, and railgun slugs the size of buildings converged on the silent black ship. In the Synod, Valis watched, expecting the ancient vessel to be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of fire. No shield could hold against that. It was a saturation bombardment that would crack a moon. The ordnance struck. Explosions blossomed like a garden of hellfire, enveloping the Aegis in a sphere of expanding plasma and debris. The Krell cheered. The humans on Earth watched their screens in despair, believing their miraculous savior had been destroyed as quickly as it had appeared. The smoke cleared. The Aegis was untouched. The golden lines upon its hull had not even flickered. The kinetic rounds had been stopped dead in space, suspended in a gravity field millimeters from the hull. The plasma had been siphoned away. The ship had not fought back, it had simply disallowed the damage. Negotiation failed, the voice intoned, sounding almost disappointed. Initiating pacification protocols, targeting aggressors. What followed was not a battle. A battle implies two sides struggling for dominance. This was a correction. From the golden fissures of the Aegis, no missiles launched. Instead, beams of pure white light, gravitational lances, snapped out with surgical precision. They did not explode the Krell ships. They dismantled them. The beams struck the Krell dreadnoughts, and the massive warships simply came apart. Molecular bonds were severed, armor plating unspooled like ribbons. Reactors were extracted and cast into the void, cold and inert. It was violence of the highest order, violence so advanced it looked like art. The Krell fleet, the terror of the sector, was being disassembled like a child's toy. There was no debris cloud, no radioactive fallout. The enemy ships were simply reduced to their component atoms and scattered into the solar wind. In 10 minutes, the Krell armada was gone. Not retreated, not wrecked, gone. The space around Earth was empty, save for the human remnants and the colossal, golden-etched monolith. In the Grand Synod, the silence stretched, heavy and terrified. Valis had slumped into his throne. Kalen was standing, his hands pressed against the glass of the observation deck, his mind racing to comprehend what he had witnessed. That technology, Kalen breathed. That is not human. The humans are barely Type 1 on the Kardashev scale. They burn liquid dinosaurs to leave their gravity well. That ship is Type 3. It utilizes vacuum energy. It manipulates the strong nuclear force. Who are they? Where did they come from? The screen shifted. The Aegis was hailing Earth. The audio feed was crackling with the weeping, stunned voices of Earth's command centers asking the same question. Unknown vessel, this is United Earth Command. We surrender. Please do not fire. The voice from the Aegis softened, losing its tectonic edge, becoming something warmer, something ancient and sorrowful. Stand down, Earth Command. There is no surrender. We are not conquerors. We are the memory. Memory? The Earth Commander's voice trembled. I don't understand. Look to the stars, the voice replied. Look to the deep dark. You thought you were alone. You thought you were the first to leave the nest. You were wrong. We are the first diaspora. We left before the ice, before the FLOODS, before the history you know was written. We have traveled the long night. We have built EMPIRES in the void between galaxies. But we never forgot the cradle. The revelation hit the Grand Synod like a physical blow. Valis gasped. The first diaspora? Impossible. The archaeological records of Earth show no evidence of a previous spacefaring civilization. They left no evidence because they took it with them, Kalen realized, his mind reeling with the implications. Or they scrubbed it to protect those who stayed behind. They left Earth to grow on its own, a control group or perhaps a seed bank, and they went out. Into the intergalactic void. To survive there, to thrive there, they would have to become gods. The Aegis turned slowly, its golden lines pulsing. It seemed to be looking directly at the sensors of the Ethelgard, piercing the light years of distance, staring into the Grand Synod itself. We see the observers, the voice boomed, addressing the Ethelgard directly for the first time. The Kyle-Thyr Ascendancy, we have watched you watching US. You saw a dying animal and waited for the carcass. You mistook patience for weakness. You mistook isolation for ignorance. Valis scrambled to activate the diplomatic channel, his arrogance replaced by the primal fear of a predator suddenly realizing it is prey. Great ones, Valis stammered, his voice breaking. We did not intervene, the prime directive, we are but chroniclers, we did not know. You did not care, the Aegis interrupted. That is the sin, not ignorance, but apathy. You claim to steward the galaxy, yet you let GARDNS burn. The visual feed showed a small shuttle detaching from the massive hull of the Aegis. It was heading not for Earth, but towards the coordinates of the Ethelgard observation station. We are coming aboard, prepare for dialogue. It was not a request. Kalen looked at Valis. The High Archon was trembling. The dynamics of the galaxy had shifted in the span of an hour. The humans were not the upstarts. They were the protected younger siblings of a Titan, and the Titan was angry. The arrival of the human delegation was nothing like the pomp and circumstance of the ascendancy. There were no trumpets, no holographic banners. The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures stepped onto the polished obsidian floor of the Grand Synod. They wore armor that seemed to be woven from light and shadow, faceless helms that retracted to reveal human faces. But these were not the humans of Earth. These beings were taller. Their skin possessed a subtle luminosity, and their eyes held the depth of nebulas. They moved with a grace that suggested their bodies were augmented, perfected, tuned to a frequency of reality the Ethelgard could scarcely perceive. The leader, a woman with hair like spun silver and eyes that looked tired, stepped forward. She looked at the terrified council of aliens at the opulent hall at the projection of the galaxy. She did not bow, she did not posture, she simply stood, radiating a calmness that was more intimidating than any weapon. "I am Commander Halion of the 7th Void Fleet," she said. Her voice was unamplified, yet it carried clearly to the furthest reaches of the hall. "I speak for the diaspora." Valis rose, trying to muster the dignity of his station. "Commander Halion, we welcome you. We are the Ethelgard. We are the guardians of order in this sector." Halion smiled, but it was a smile devoid of humor. "Order," she repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what you call it, watching a civilization be exterminated by industrial barbarians? You sat in your high tower and tallied the dead. That is not order, that is voyeurism. We are bound by non-interference laws." Valis protested, his voice rising. "If we intervened in every conflict, we would become tyrants. We allow species to develop on their own." "And yet," Halion said, stepping closer, "you were prepared to let the Krell annex the Sol system. You would have traded with them. You would have accepted their ambassadors over the ashes of Earth. Do not speak to me of laws, speak to me of convenience." Kalen stepped forward, driven by a curiosity that outweighed his fear. "Commander, if I may. You speak of the first diaspora, our records, our science, suggests humans evolved on Earth only recently in cosmic terms. How could you have left eons ago? The temporal mechanics do not align." Halion looked at Kalen, and her expression softened slightly. She saw the scholar in him, the thirst for truth. "Time is not a straight line, young one, and Earth has been the cradle more than once. Civilization is a cycle. We are the result of the previous turn of the wheel. We left because we saw what was coming, not the Krell, not the petty squabbles of this galaxy. We saw the Great Filter, and we chose to outrun it." "The Great Filter?" Kalen asked. "The silence," Halion said. "The reason why the universe is so empty, the reason why you find ruins on dead worlds but no survivors. There is a predator in the dark, a force of entropy that wakes when a galaxy becomes too loud. We left to draw it away. We have been fighting a war in the space between galaxies for 10,000 years. We are the reason you are still alive. We are the reason the Krell were even able to build an empire without being eaten." The council fell silent. The scope of her words was paralyzing. The Ethelgard believed they were the masters of the galaxy, the ancient ones. Now they were being told they were merely children playing in a sandbox, protected by a gardener they had never seen, fighting a wolf they didn't know existed. "Why return now?" Valis asked, his voice a whisper. "Because the war is changing," Halion said, her face darkening. "And because the signal from Earth, the desperate cry of our kin, it reached us. We do not intervene in the internal politics of the cradle. We let them learn, we let them bleed, because struggle creates strength. But extinction, no, we do not allow the root to be severed." She tapped a control on her wrist, and the massive holographic map of the galaxy changed. It zoomed out. And out, until the Milky Way was a small spiral of light in a sea of darkness. And then red dots began to appear in the void surrounding the galaxy. Thousands of them, millions, a closing ring of fire. "The enemy is returning," Halion said grimly. "The Krell were fleeing them, though they didn't know it. The unrest in the outer sectors, the sudden migrations of species, it is all the same cause. The tide is coming in. The Aegis is not just a warship, it is a recruitment vessel." Recruitment. Valis stared at the map. "You mean to conscript us?" "No," Halion said. "We do not use slaves, we need allies, real lies, not observers, not judges. We need warriors, we need thinkers, we need builders. The Earth humans, they have the spark. The stubborn, illogical, furious refusal to die, that is the weapon we need. We saved them today not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. They are the genetic backup. They are the chaotic variable that the enemy cannot predict." She turned to Valis. "And you, Ethelgard, you have hoarded knowledge for millennia. You have maps, star charts, biological databases. You have sat on a mountain of treasure while the world burned. The time for hoarding is over. The tax is due." "And if we refuse?" Valis asked, though the fight had left him. "Then you will die," Halion said simply. "Not by our hand, but when the enemy arrives, they will not care about your non-interference treaties. They will consume your biology and repurpose your technology. You can stand with the cradle and with the diaspora, or you can stand alone. But know this, the Aegis is leaving. We have pushed back the Krell, but the main front is calling us. We will leave a garrison. We will share technology with Earth. We will uplift them because they are ready. Are you?" The question hung in the air, a challenge that stripped away the pretenses of the Ethelgard civilization. Kalen looked at the map, at the encroaching red tide. He looked at the primitive, battered Earth, and then at the godlike humans who had returned to save it. He realized that the hierarchy of the galaxy had been inverted. The primitives were the chosen ones. The ancients were the ignorant. "I am ready," Kalen said, stepping forward. He ignored the shocked hiss of Valis. "I will share the data. I will coordinate the integration of our fleets with Earth Command. If the darkness is coming, I do not wish to face it with my eyes closed." Halion nodded, a gesture of genuine respect. "Good. Then there is hope." She turned back to the window, looking out at the Aegis, which hung in space like a silent promise. The universe is a dark forest, she said almost to herself. For a long time, humanity tried to be quiet, we tried to hide, but we realized that hiding only delays the inevitable, so we decided to become the monster that the monsters fear. We built the fire, and now we are handing you a torch. The diplomatic proceedings that followed were frantic and transformative. The arrival of the Aegis had shattered the political landscape of the galaxy. The Krell Empire, leaderless and with their grand armada atomized, fractured into warring warlord states, posing no threat to the core worlds. Earth, reeling from the brink of extinction, found itself the sudden recipient of technology and wisdom that leaped them forward by centuries in a matter of days. The Terran Diaspora Alliance was formed. It was not a smooth process. There was fear, resentment, and the cultural shock of a species meeting its own godlike ancestors. But the reality of the threat, the encroaching entropy swarm, forced cooperation. The Ethelgard underwent a cultural revolution. Led by Kalen, now elevated to the rank of high strategist, they opened their archives, they admitted their failure. They began to retrofit their elegant, fragile ships for war. They learned from the humans of Earth not technology but spirit. They learned how to fight when the odds were zero. They learned the concept of spite as a strategic asset. Months passed. The Aegis remained in orbit around Saturn, a silent sentinel, while its fabricators churned out autonomous defense platforms to ring the Sol system. Commander Halion spent much of her time on Earth, walking the ruined cities, speaking with the leaders of the resistance. She was looking for something specific, a quality of soul that the diaspora had lost in their millennia of perfection. She found it in the dirt and the blood of the trenches. She found it in the eyes of soldiers who had charged battleships with retrofitted mining shuttles. She found the raw, unfiltered will to survive. "We became too perfect," she confessed to the Earth General, a scarred man named Thorne, as they stood overlooking the reconstruction of New York. "In the void, we optimized ourselves. We removed fear. We removed panic. We became logic and power, but in doing so, we lost the frantic creativity that comes from terror. We forgot how to improvise. That is why we need you. We are the shield, strong and unbreakable, but you are the sword. You are the madness that breaks the rules." Thorne spat on the ground, wiping soot from his forehead. "So you came back to weaponize us?" "We came back to complete ourselves," Halion corrected, "and to save our home." The climax of the intervention came not with a battle, but with a departure. The sensors of the Aegis detected a rupture in the galactic halo. A scout element of the entropy swarm had breached the galaxy. It was time. The Aegis powered up its singularity drive. The golden lines on its hull shone with the brightness of a star. Halion stood in the Grand Synod one last time, flanked by Kalen and a holographic projection of General Thorne. "We return to the deep dark," Halion announced. "The enemy knows we are here. We will draw them off. We will lead them on a chase across the empty clusters, buying you time. Use it well, build, fortify, unite." "Will you return?" Kalen asked. "If we win," Halion said. "Or if we lose, if we fall, the swarm will come for you next, so do not pray for our victory. Prepare for your own war." She looked at the humans of Earth, and for the first time she saluted. It was the salute of the diaspora, a fist over the heart, palm open to the sky. "Terra Invicta," she whispered. "Terra Invicta," Thorne replied. The Aegis vanished. There was no acceleration, no streak of light. It simply ceased to exist in these coordinates, folding space around itself and jumping into the intergalactic void. The space where it had been felt empty, colder. But the silence it left behind was different now. It was not the silence of the grave. It was the silence of a workshop. The galaxy had changed. The humans of Earth were no longer the primitives in the dirt. They were the inheritors of a legacy that spanned the cosmos. They had been given a second chance, bought with the courage of their ancestors, and the Ethelgard, watching from their high station, finally understood the nature of humanity. Valis, now a retired elder, watched the Earth fleet conducting exercises with their new plasma drives, technology gifted by the diaspora, refined by human ingenuity. He watched a Terran cruiser execute a drift maneuver that should have torn the ship apart, a maneuver that defied all Ethelgard safety protocols, but allowed the ship to bring its main guns to bear in half the standard time. "They are insane," Valis muttered, but there was no derision in his voice, only awe. Kalen stood beside him, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the reconstructed Earth. "Yes," Kalen agreed, "they are chaotic, they are emotional, they are dangerous." He paused, watching the Terran ships form a protective phalanx around a civilian convoy. "And thank the void they are on our side." Far away in the cold, lightless expanse between the galaxies, the Aegis of the void dropped out of warp. The sensors screamed. Ahead of them, the darkness was moving. A living tide of shadow, billions of miles wide, blocked out the distant stars. The entropy swarm, the eater of worlds. Commander Halion stood on the bridge of the Aegis. She felt the vibration of the ship's weapons charging, antimatter lances, singularity torpedoes, reality-shearing projectors. She looked at the overwhelming enemy, a force that had extinguished 1,000 civilizations. She did not feel fear. She felt the connection to the little blue world far behind her. She felt the grit of General Thorne, the curiosity of Kalen, the stubborn refusal of a species that would not die. She smiled. "All batteries," she ordered, her voice calm and terrible. "Open fire, let them know humanity is still here." The Aegis erupted in light, a lone spark challenging the infinite night. It was a warship from nowhere, fighting for a humanity that had forgotten it against a darkness that would consume everything. And as the silent beams of gold tore into the shadow, back in the Milky Way, a child on Earth looked up at the night sky and wondered why one of the stars was shining just a little bit brighter than the rest. The story of the Aegis was over for the Ethelgard, but the story of the Alliance was just beginning. The galaxy was no longer a collection of isolated species waiting to die. It was a fortress, and in the center of it, beating like a heart of iron and fire, was Earth. Humans wiped the blood from their mouths, picked up their tools, and looked at the stars not with wonder but with purpose. They had been underestimated, they had been dismissed, but now they knew the truth. They were the monsters feared, and they had a lot of work to do before the darkness came back. In the council chambers of the Ethelgard, the holographic map of the Sol system remained active. It showed the scars of the war, the debris fields, the healing atmosphere. But it also showed something new. Massive shipyards under construction around Mars. Fusion signatures lighting up the dark side of the moon. The humans were building. They were not building colony ships to flee. They were building dreadnoughts. Kalen watched the data streams. The humans had taken the gift of the diaspora and, true to their nature, were already modifying it. They were stripping away the safety limiters, overpowering the reactors, bolting on extra armor. They were making the elegant technology of the ancients ugly, brutal, and effective. "They will surpass the diaspora," Kalen said softly, "given time if they survive." "They will survive," Valis replied, turning away from the window. "I have studied their history now, really studied I. Do you know what their defining trait is? It is not intelligence, it is not strength." "What is it?" "Spite," Valis said. "Pure, crystallized spite. They refused to let the universe tell them what to do. The Krell tried to kill them and they got angry. The laws of physics told them they couldn't fly and they built wings. The silence of the void told them they were alone and they shouted until their ancestors came back." Valis chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "The entropy swarm is coming to eat the galaxy, but I pity it. It is coming to eat a species that runs on spite and high explosives. It is going to have a very bad indigestion." The two aliens stood in the dim light, united by a newfound respect for the terrifying, wonderful creatures next door. The universe was vast, dark, and full of horrors. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the Ethelgard were not afraid of the dark. They knew that somewhere out there, a warship from nowhere was holding the line. And right here on their doorstep, the children of that warship were sharpening their knives. The golden age of peace was over. The age of defiance had begun, and it was going to be glorious. The transmission from the Aegis, sent moments before its departure, finally finished decoding on Kalen's console. It was a data packet containing the schematics for the Void Lance, the primary weapon of the diaspora. Attached to the file was a simple text message from Commander Halion. "We held the door closed for as long as we could. Now we are fighting on the porch. Here is the key to the gun cabinet. Don't miss." Kalen authorized the transfer to Earth Command. He watched the confirmation light blink green. The humans had the weapon. "Don't miss," Kalen whispered to the void. On Earth, General Thorne received the file. He looked at the specifications. The energy requirements were insane. The recoil would probably shift the planet's orbit. It was dangerous, unstable, and theoretical. "Get the engineers," Thorne barked at his aide. "And get me a cup of coffee. We're going to build a god killer." The scene faded from the war room to the orbital view of Earth. The sun was rising over the Pacific, casting a brilliant crescent of light across the blue world. It looked fragile from a distance, a marble of glass and water. But down in the atmosphere, amidst the ruins and the rebuilding, 1,000,000,000 fires of industry were burning. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was arming itself. The cinematic view pulled back, leaving the Sol system, leaving the spiral arm, drifting into the intergalactic void where the Aegis fought its lonely war. The flashes of its battle were invisible to the naked eye, but the ripple effects were felt in the fabric of spacetime. A silent guardian, a watchful protector. The screen went black, leaving only the echo of the Aegis's motto ringing in the mind. "We are the memory, and we do not forget."